What's up, hockey fans? Welcome into the latest edition of the BR NHL Insider Notebook. I'm your host, Frank Seravalli, and we are streaming live on the BR app as well as YouTube. Let's make this an interactive show. Throw your questions, comments, concerns, preseason predictions into the chat, and we'll be sure to talk about that over the course of today's stream. Today is Tuesday, August 26th, and that means we are 42 days away from the start of the NHL regular season opening night, with the defending Stanley Cup champion, two-time defending Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers set to raise yet another banner at Amerant Bank Arena, and they'll be doing so without Matthew Tkachuk on the ice. Reports over the last week have been confirmed that Matthew Tkachuk, probably no surprise to anyone who's been following this pretty closely, will be missing the first 2 to 3 months of the NHL regular season, as he has the torn adductor and hernia surgery to repair that significant injury dating back to the Four Nations face-off, where he was not able to complete the tournament. So where does that leave the Florida Panthers moving forward? The beast of the East, the team that was able to keep all of their trade deadline acquisitions and re-sign everyone, somehow fitting them under the cap. Well, maybe with a little help and cushion from that Matthew Tkachuk injury to start the season. Just makes life a little bit easier for the cap crunchers in Florida. But where does that leave them? And I think maybe some history could be a guide. Take a look back at the last 25 games of the season after the Four Nations face-off when Matthew Tkachuk went down with that injury, and their record was really rather meager. 13, 11, and 1, good for 16th in the NHL, just about average. But what was really interesting about taking a look at these numbers is that, well, the Panthers really struggled to score. 32nd in the NHL over that stretch with 58 goals in those 25 games. Interestingly enough, they ratcheted things down defensively. 58 goals also allowed for a net even 0 there. Third best in the NHL over that period of time, the last 25 games of the season. Power play, 21%, and penalty kill, 84%. So interesting to look back as you kind of think about the Panthers on cruise control, getting acclimated with their deadline acquisitions. Matthew Tkachuk, unable to finish the regular season, comes back for the playoffs. And I don't know that maybe in the wake of Sam Bennett winning the Conn Smythe Trophy, we didn't really talk necessarily enough about how ridiculous of a playoff run that Matthew Tkachuk had with the Panthers. Playing with that injury, which he referenced on the ice after winning the Stanley Cup, he tore the adductor off of his bone. It just makes you sick thinking about it. And he was still able to put up 23 points in 23 postseason games. Pretty incredible stuff. So best wishes to Matthew Tkachuk as he heals up and the Florida Panthers figure out what their new normal is to start the season, as they are chasing a 4th consecutive Stanley Cup final appearance, which is just unbelievable words to say. Let's take a peek at our chat and see what's going on. Windy City Hockey wants to know, what's up, Frank? Is there any update as to why Wyatt Kaiser remains an unsigned RFA for the Chicago Blackhawks? Man, really interesting question, Windy City Hockey. One that, quite honestly, August 26th, hadn't really spent any time thinking about or looking at. But the interesting thing for the Chicago Blackhawks and looking at their defense moving forward is, where's everyone going to fit? They've got so many young guys on that back end, Kaiser part of it, and I think Kaiser and Allen could be your sort of perfect, ideal, prototypical third pair moving forward. But when you think about some of the other guys that are in the mix there, Del Mastro, and then you think about the steps that were taken forward by this team and some of the young guys that then got it to go back to Rockford in the AHL playoffs and get a taste of some meaningful hockey as a pro, there's so many guys taking a step forward. I think the Blackhawks are probably looking at 9 to 10 legitimate, realistic NHL defensemen, and someone's going to have to be on the move. I'm not suggesting at all that it's Kaiser, but just wondering how this all ends up working out, because it does become a numbers game, and I wonder if that's part of it as well in terms of these contract talks and where it ends up going. So some other news from last week, as we had the European Player Media Tour held in Milan, Italy ahead of the 2026 Olympics, is we have some more information about the 2028 World Cup of Hockey. So refresher on the international calendar. We just had the Four Nations face-off. which exceeded all expectations and seized upon a really interesting moment in time. First best on best international hockey in 10 years since the 11 years since the Sochi Olympics. We had an unbelievable Four Nations face-off. 2026, we've got the Olympics in Milan, Italy, and then 2028 will be our next iteration of international hockey after that, best on best, with the 2028 World Cup of Hockey. We're going to have two locations, at least to start, two different pools, one in Europe and one in North America, and then the winners of the European bracket will come over to North America for this tournament, which is going to take somewhere around 13 to 17 days to pull off. 8 countries, I should say, no hybrid teams. So no Team North America, no Team Europe, as we saw in the 2016 World Cup of Hockey. But what we will see here is invitation only. So the NHL is making these decisions on their own. There's no qualifying round. This is simply the NHL extending invitations to some federations to participate in this tournament. So what could that field look like? Well, this is just a guess, but let's take a peek at what I believe are the teams that are guaranteed to be in. There's the obvious ones, the teams that were just in the Four Nations face-off, US, Canada, Sweden, and Finland. But then what about Czechia? That seems to be a pretty strong fit. And a sixth one, I'm going to say Switzerland is probably pretty much guaranteed in. So that leaves some significant decisions to make. What will the geopolitical climate look like in 2028? Will Russia be part of this tournament? Some of the most prominent NHL players and superstars are Russians. It's difficult in an NHL and NHLPA tournament to tell those players who, through no fault of their own, may be unable to participate in a league and union sanctioned tournament. So luckily for the NHL, they've got some runway between now and then, and I'm not going to make any declarations here as to what I think should happen. Although the interesting part of that conversation is that the reason why this tournament last February was just 4 nations is because Sweden and Finland had both made it very clear to the NHL and NHLPA that if Russia participates, that they will not. So those are going to be some choppy waters that the NHL is going to have to navigate around. But luckily for the NHL, this tournament is stronger than 8 federations deep. So they can make some decisions if they decide to not invite Russia. What about Leon Draisaitl, JJ Peterka, and Germany? That would be a great fit. Tough to have Germany not participate in the Four Nations face-off. You think about a player of Draisaitl's stature and him having to sit back and watch some of the best international hockey that we've seen in a long time. That's what played out recently. Another team that would be on the cusp, I would have Slovakia. They are a proud hockey country, of course. And I'm just trying to think, did I miss any other ones here in my on the cusp category? I think that was pretty much it. Just double checking my notes here. Yeah, that's it for the on the cusp category. And if we're putting one more tier together, so just doing the math, just 2 of those 3 that are on the cusp will need to round out the field. But if you're looking for another country to hang on for or to root for, how about Latvia, Denmark, Norway, and France? France's program has taken a huge step forward in recent months. We've also got Italy as the host country participating, of course, in the 2026 Winter Olympics. I'd love to see a play-in. I know it's not going to happen, but play your way there. Have the results of this upcoming Olympics help dictate the field for what the 2028 World Cup of Hockey looks like. I know it's a long way off, and I know it's August 26th in 2025. But I'm very excited for the 2028 World Cup of Hockey, if you can't tell. Can't wait to learn more about the details of who may be hosting and where. I'm wondering if they choose non-NHL cities. Maybe they decide to do a test run in a different market. Maybe they decide to spice it up a bit. Be awesome to see what the NHL decides to do. And by the way, that year in between, so we've got 2026 Olympics. There will be a send-off event on Long Island at UBS Arena. They were previously scheduled to host the All-Star weekend before. That's probably not going to happen. Some kind of All-Star send-off. I don't think there's going to be a huge on-ice component. And then sources indicated that 2027, that year in between, the New York Islanders and UBS Arena will be hosting a full-fledged All-Star weekend with all the festivities fit for such an event. So something to look forward to if you're on Long Island, even though this one upcoming season might be slightly disappointing. Speaking of New York, we've got a question here from Peter in the chat who says, "Hey Frank, what do you think will happen with Panarin this year if the Rangers are out? Could they move him at the deadline?" Peter, I could for sure see that happening if the New York Rangers are out. But I'm going to tell you this. I don't think the Rangers are going to be out. I have the Rangers as a playoff team. I have the Rangers as a bounce back team. I think they had to make some significant changes. I think they had some obviously disappointing seasons and things went off the rails, but new coach, new environment, new mood. And I think they've got enough talent to be able to overcome a lot of those obstacles. I mean, think back to the start of the season that they had and think about how poorly they played after that. And yet they still finished well into the 80s in points. In the grand scheme of things, 8-ish, 9-ish points out of the postseason. They're really not that far off, and I think they can reinvent themselves in a pretty big way this upcoming season. So I've got the Rangers in, and if the Rangers are in, I would assume at some point that means finding a deal for Artemi Panarin that makes sense on an extension. I know Ranger fans can be upset. It's a hot-button subject because they think, hey, got to find a way to win with Artemi Panarin in the playoffs. Maybe he's not the guy that can get this team over the hump. I've got lots of faith in Artemi Panarin, and I think there's a deal on the table that makes sense for both sides, or will be at some point during this upcoming season. Let's see how that plays out. What are the Leafs' next move, in your opinion? Eric Martin wants to know. I'm going to say rounding out the roster. They've got a whole bunch of players. It feels like they've got 26 guys on one-way contracts this year. That may actually be the number. But as mentioned in the last stream, I do think the Leafs remain in conversation and remain a possibility for Jack Roslovic. Brad Treliving is always on the hunt, and I think they're in a spot where they're just looking to get better. You know, you take Mitch Marner out, you make a bunch of different smaller adjustments, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see what the Leafs look like to start camp. And I think what this does is probably ratchets up a little bit of pressure on Austin Matthews to return to the form that he had as a near 70-goal scorer a few years ago. It feels like it's been a little while since we've had that after, you know, an up and down health year and obviously a disappointing season for him from a personal perspective. Also leaves you to wonder what might have things been like had the Toronto Maple Leafs beaten the Florida Panthers in the Stanley Cup playoffs this year. Such an interesting conversation to have. So Austin Matthews, right now, he's in Plymouth, Michigan at the Team USA orientation camp. Team Canada set to hold their Olympic orientation camp later this week in Calgary. But do need to reference Austin Matthews and his former general manager, Kyle Dubas, who works for the Pittsburgh Penguins, who are closing in on a sale. Yes, that's right. After just a few years of owning the Pittsburgh Penguins, sources indicate that the Fenway Sports Group is closing in on a sale to the Hoffman family of Chicago. That sale is on track to close at some point. I don't expect any hiccups. The expected valuation at purchase is a cool $1.75 billion after Fenway Sports Group purchased the team just a few short years ago for $950 million approximately. So it's a big deal for the Hoffman family, who also owns the ECHL's Florida Everblades, to get in the game at the ownership level. And as this continues to move along through a pretty lengthy process, sources indicate that it is a strong possibility that this sale could potentially be on the docket to be formally approved by the Board of Governors at their annual preseason meeting in early October. So keep an eye on that, but curious to see what, if any, impact this has on the future outlook of the team from an on-ice perspective. Does this hasten the rebuild? Pittsburgh is one of those few teams out there looking at this season saying, hey, probably not our year. I think San Jose and Chicago are in a similar category. How quickly can Pittsburgh get to the bottom, and can they be in the Gavin McKenna sweepstakes for number one overall in next June's draft? Let's wait and see, because that would be interesting. Easy torch passing between Mario Lemieux to Sidney Crosby to Gavin McKenna. That would be something to watch for sure. Time to take a peek at our PTO tracker. It's always getting close, late August, to tryout time, training camp time. Camps are slated to open in mid-September. And so let's take a look at our tryout tracker. We've got 4 guys that have inked PTOs, professional tryout agreements, with their teams to this point. Minnesota Wild and defenseman Jack Johnson. Brendan Smith as well, a defenseman with the Columbus Blue Jackets after spending last year with the Dallas Stars. Milan Lucic, after sitting out a couple seasons as a result of some disciplinary issues, he has signed a tryout with the St. Louis Blues. I'm curious to see what he has left in the tank. And the guy that I believe has the best shot to turn his tryout into a full-time contract would be Connor Sherry of the New York Rangers. Of course, his experience going back to the Stanley Cup days with the Pittsburgh Penguins and new Rangers coach Mike Sullivan. He's a guy that I think can find a way to reinvent himself after a mutual contract termination with the Tampa Bay Lightning. He's ready to bet on himself. I love a guy who's willing to do that. So keep an eye on Connor Sherry. I think he's a guy that could certainly earn a contract on Broadway with the Blue Shirts. Let's take another peek at the chat. We have one here. Aside from the McDavid extension, do you see the Oilers doing anything else before training camp? I don't think so. I think it's been relatively quiet on that front. I think they're pretty comfortable with their team and the infusion of youth that they're expected to get between Ike Howard, acquired from the Tampa Bay Lightning, as well as their big younger addition from last season, coming over from the Buffalo Sabres. And I don't know why I'm blanking on his name, but look, I think the Oilers need that injection of youth. I think they are in a spot where they need to, really turn things over as a team that was a little bit older. And look, I think that's going to be one of the defining, I don't know if characteristics is the right word. That's going to be one of the, interesting points to look at for the Oilers moving forward, is having an older, experienced team that got very close to winning a Stanley Cup. Who are the next guys coming? Matt Savoy is the name that I was looking for, that came over in that trade with the Sabres for McLeod. But putting them in a position where new guys can begin pulling on the rope. They don't have very many picks or prospects by the nature of the position that they were in the standings. They've been trading those away. Over the next 4 years, if Connor McDavid is signing a 4-year contract extension, how many more guys like Savoy, like Ike Howard, can they find to plug in their lineup to just begin to turn that roster over a little bit, make it a little bit younger, find new contributors, and most importantly, find new contributors that are mostly living in the entry-level system, playing on rookie deals that will help you so much with your cap situation moving forward, as more and more is going to be devoted to players that needed raises. Leon Draisaitl, his new deal kicks in. Connor McDavid will need a new one. At some point, Stuart Skinner will need a new one. You've got the new one kicking in for Evan Bouchard. The math gets hairy, and when you're in that spot, look, you need guys that are contributing through the entry-level system. So Matt Savoy, Ike Howard, 2 new guys, 2 new faces in the lineup. How much of those top 6 or middle 6 minutes can those guys bite off and be very productive? That's going to be one of the defining narratives of the Edmonton Oilers season. And until then, I don't see them doing a whole ton before the start of training camp. Marv16 wants to know, do the Wings trade for a top 4 forward or D-man before the season starts? I doubt it. I think so much of the shopping has been done to this point. I think what you might see is some tinkering around the edges for some of these teams, but man, trade season, I haven't heard much percolating at all. And I know, famous last words, but it has been relatively quiet on that front for sure. So with that, that'll bring a close to our Tuesday, August 26th, BR NHL Insider Notebook. It's been great to chat some puck with you. 42 days away from the NHL regular season. Hang on. Hockey's coming back soon. We'll talk to you then.